And that's just not true. People do feel words, and in our work, these words or microaggressions or micro insults, they or micro inequities, whatever terminology you want to use, they are what we call death by 1,000 cuts. And so people will often have a policy, between the couple of like, we're not going to talk about work outside of work. And so that's just something that has to be managed from a maturity standpoint, level of professionalism. Yeah, I mean, I think it's unavoidable in nowadays. And I really struggled for many, many years to connect to my religion from a spiritual side. I just never felt like I was getting it. There was something missing. And I've been on a search for many years, reading lots of different books to try to find that connection. It comes and goes over the years. I'll go through spurts while I'm doing more into it, trying to find that connection. But I've just never felt anything going to synagogue or, except for the friends and family and the good food and culture and history.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is another episode of the Saucetown Investor Podcast. Amazing guest today that I am excited to have. I was going to say in the studio, but he's actually on the other side of in the digital studio with us. But our guest today is the founder and president of Global Diversity Partners, Inc. He previously led inclusion, diversity, and equity, that's ID and E, for 4 global businesses within Amazon operations and the sales and support group at Microsoft, a couple of little companies you guys might have heard of. He is the author of Daily Practices of Inclusive Leaders. For those on video, I got my copy, my autographed copy, I might add, right here. He holds a master's degree in organizational leadership from City University of Seattle and resides in Kirkland, Washington. I am joined by Jonathan Stutz. Jonathan, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Matt. Great for you to have me on the show. I appreciate it, man.
Great to have you here. And where are you? Are you in Kirkland today, or where are you joining us from?
Yeah, I'm in Kirkland today. I'll be here for a few days. It's we're definitely dealing with some heat here. It's going to be close to 90 today, so glad to have the AC on.
Well, it's the right place to be in the summer. I tell a lot of New York people think that it just rains year round in Seattle, which it does a decent amount of the year. But summer in Seattle, when you're surrounded by water and boats, it's pretty untouchable.
Yeah, pretty great. And, really from beginning of July through almost October, we get great weather. It's really, and we have a beautiful fall here, but people always think about the gray from basically November to May.
And and on top of that, my Mariners are playing good ball. Cal Raleigh just broke the catcher home run record, so it's a good time to be in the PNW right now.
Yeah, absolutely. We're just hoping they can catch those Astros and see some exciting baseball this fall.
All right. Well, I could do an entire Mariners podcast with you, and I would love to, frankly. Maybe we can do that another time, but I want to talk about your book and, of course, about your whole career. So, but before we get into that, just real quick, take us through your story, just a little bit, growing up. Where did you grow up? Tell us about your family, what you were like as a kid, and kind of take us through high school.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot of fun. So born in Toronto, Canada. My mom's American, my dad's Canadian, and I was born in Toronto. And my dad was in the soft drink business. He had the Canadian rights to a soft drink company. And when I was 5, he moved us down to Atlanta, Georgia, and he became president of that company. And it was really during the height of the civil rights movement. So as a young kid moving from one of the most diverse countries in the world, Canada, going down to Atlanta during the height of the civil rights movement, and being Jewish, I experienced a lot of discrimination, anti-Semitism, hate, even as a young kid in elementary school. I remember being carpooled to Pop Warner Little League, football games as a kid, and hearing my friends' parents refer to Black people by the N-word, calling them coons. I was, got in fights on the playground by being called a dirty Jew, had to tolerate jokes, that were anti-Semitic. And that really stuck with me as a kid because at home, we were a very liberal family. My family worked on, my brother worked on, Democratic politics, worked on Bobby Kennedy's campaign. My other brother was also active as well. And we just, our values being Jewish, we came from values of this concept of tikkun olam, which means to repair the world, that you're brought into this world with a responsibility to make it a better place before you leave. And that was a value that was, I was indoctrinated into. My family was always doing social service work, social equity, social justice work. I remember my mom actually going down into the inner city of Atlanta and reading to kids, second graders that were in very segregated schools, teaching Black kids, young Black kids how to read and doing really good social work in the community. So that was always just a part of me. And then moved to Mercer Island at 10. My parents divorced, and my mom was a Seattle girl, so she moved back to where she was from. And that was a big difference, coming to Mercer Island and having the opportunity to, be with kids and people that just were more open and inclusive and just being treated very differently than I was in the South. Um, and Fast forward, till to my mid 30s, I was working for a temp service and I was in sales, and my clients were asking me to help them with increasing the representation of minorities in their candidate pools because they were hiring a lot of, I was with a temp service, so a lot of the temps that were working for them came from me, and they were bringing them on board as full-time employees after about 3 months. They call it temp to perm. And they wanted to diversify their workforce. A lot of them were federal contractors like Siemens AG and others. And I found that this is something that I could help them with. I was able to reach out to community-based organizations on the Seattle side and help them recruit candidates that brought that diversity of Black and brown folks to interview for jobs on the East Side. I created something at that time called the East Side Diversity Task Force. And so it was this bringing together of East Side HR folks, recruiters, and community-based organizations from the Seattle side. And that was really, truly the business case for diversity, like literally helping them solve a business issue they were trying to solve. And it really brought out a passion that I'd had from my childhood, that I had this spark inside me, this pilot light burning. And when I was asked to help them with this recruiting effort, it really touched me and felt like this is something I can be good at. I can apply these sales skills that I had developed and apply it to diversity recruiting. Um, just kind of quickly on the story, Microsoft got word of the work I was doing. I was featured in Diversity Business News, and a picture of me. I got a chance to meet Jesse Jackson, and there was a picture of me with Jesse Jackson. And Microsoft saw that. They recruited me in to be a diversity recruiting outreach specialist. And that led to a 19-year career at Microsoft. And I worked in like 6 different groups over the 19 years, but it all started being on that very first diversity team at Microsoft. And I ended up, you know, kind of parlaying that East Side Diversity Task Force into something that would work for the tech group, and created another group called the Professional Technical Diversity Network that also became very successful, bringing the tech companies all around the Northwest together with the professional technical organizations that exist, such as Black MBAs Association, Asian Accountants Association, Society for Hispanic Professional Engineers, Women in Technology. There's just a plethora of them. And anyway, that just led to a very long, successful ride at Microsoft, and got me into really doing the work that I'm very passionate about. Long answer, but you asked for the life story, so I gave you to it in 5 minutes. Hopefully, that was under 5.
I was gonna say that was pretty quick. You covered a lot there. So this book it's a book, but it's also kind of your career's work. We talked about this offline that we won't do a massive deep dive on how to write a book today, but you had a lot of the material, and this book kind of put it all in one place in a very digestible way. It's about 200 pages. It's very it's very to the point. It doesn't you really do get your life's work in 200 pages almost. And it made me think a ton. I mean, I'm a leader, I own a company. I know that's the kind of book I like. It makes me examine myself. It makes me look at things I could do differently. So I want to start with a key theme from the book and probably from your speaking and things that you teach, or maybe even the key theme is that inclusion doesn't start with HR. And I think a lot of companies maybe make that mistake. I've worked at companies and HR can feel a little bit almost like we're checking a box to do something. And your idea or maybe key point is that it actually comes from leadership. What does HR not cover and why is this stuff all more powerful when it comes from leadership instead?
Sure. Well, Matt, I'll preface it by saying that HR is a super important partner to the diversity work and creating an inclusive culture. And there are many great HR folks out there that we've partnered with. In fact, we have a whole chapter in the book about HR as a function, as being a partner to really scale this work, because oftentimes the groups that are doing the inclusion, diversity, and equity work are under-resourced, underfunded, and so we really have to scale our work across the company and really, build it into the fabric of the culture. We have to work through HR oftentimes because they're in the people business. But at the same time, you have to remember that HR is almost the antithesis of the work that I'm doing, because HR, if you think about it, they're in the business of risk management. Generally, they're in the business of protecting the company from risks that the employees can bring: discrimination lawsuits, sexual harassment, all sorts of issues that can come up in the HR realm, or dealing with managing risk, legal risk to the company. So their business is really protecting the company and the shareholders from the risks that employees can bring. As a general rule, I mean, certainly they're doing a lot in talent management, talent development, leadership development, compensation, getting great benefits for the employees. There's been great partners that we've had in doing this work. But you do have to remember that they are in the business of risk management that the people bring. That said, the work that we're doing in inclusion, diversity, and equity is about advocacy for people that have historically been marginalized, oppressed, discriminated against, and giving them a voice, being advocates, being really an accomplice to speak up and having agency to make sure that the company isn't just providing an equal opportunity. That you'll often see that, these equal opportunity statements, or an equal opportunity employer. But for diversity work and inclusion to really happen, you have to have equity. And equity is about fairness. It's about everybody getting what they need in order to be successful. So yes, HR is a partner, but you have to remember what their traditional role is to protect from legal risk.
Right. And in fairness, we live in a very litigious society. And so you can understand sometimes why that is their role. Part of their role is to protect the company. You also talk about in the book creating a culture of belonging. And I think culture can be, and Jonathan, I'm going to go back and forth between
Yeah,
asking
yeah.
you some questions related to inclusion and some more just general workplace questions as well. So culture is a buzzword in some cases, I think, and it's something that it's implemented really well in some cases also. You'll hear it kind of in a buzzword sense, like, we have kombucha and foosball at the office culture, right? Like we're killing it. Or even I'll see instances of it where maybe it feels forced, like there's a party that's supposed to be for the employees, but nobody really wants to go to it. And frankly, it doesn't sound very cool, for lack of a better term. So, how do we as leaders make culture feel more, I guess, meaningful and less forced, and I guess more of an something that employees want to opt into as a force, as opposed to being kind of pushed toward?
Yeah. And this gets to your first question a little bit too, about how leadership really has ownership for creating inclusion, not HR, diversity work, not HR. It kind of gets to this as well. And this is that this idea that um, it starts with the leader. The leader has to develop a connection with their employees And to me, one of the great missed opportunities, kind of underrated opportunities, is the one-on-one, whether they're weekly or biweekly, is sitting down and getting to know your people at a deeper level of who they are, what they're about, what their goals and aspirations are, and being vulnerable as a leader to sharing more about yourself and being open and vulnerable about what's going on in your life, so your employees feel more comfortable and connected to you to share what's happening in their life, so they can be vulnerable with you and knowing that you'll be empathetic. Because empathy, leaders demonstrating empathy for their employees, that they care about them, that they have compassion for them, these soft skills that are often, kind of passed off as not critical, are really critical in reality to the leader becoming a strong leader and building a strong team. And to your point, building a great culture. Because if you demonstrate empathy, that's really the pathway to inclusive leadership. It's looking out for your people, having their back, kind of creating this I've got your back, you've got my back culture, and helping your people achieve their goals and, and seeing what they need. Because empathy is about having respect and interest in your people, and understanding too that not everybody's having the same experience as you. If you're part of the dominant culture, which in our country and the U.S. and Canada is for the most part white, and at the most senior levels of most companies, it's white and male. So if you're not part of that dominant culture, it's good likelihood that you're having a different experience at that organization than everybody else. So it's kind of leadership. In the book, we talk about, lead with your ears. And this is about listening to your people, hearing about their experiences. And oftentimes I'll have leaders sit down with a group of Black employees or gay employees or disabled or veterans and hear about their experience, so they really understand that the experience they're having as a leader, as part of the dominant culture, is very different from the experience that these groups that are having, that are not part of the dominant culture, that have historically been, underestimated, honestly.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the dominant culture or the dominant group, as you call them, in the book. And in the US, it is, or in Canada as well, where you're from, is it's very clearly white males. And I want to be clear that I'm not suggesting this from reading your book, but there are a lot of, it's been in the media a lot lately, in the news. There's a lot of this idea that white males are always the problem. And I think it can be both. So white males in America right now are struggling, particularly young white males are struggling very badly. It shows up in
Hmm.
college admissions. It shows up in suicide numbers. It shows up in violent crime. It certainly showed up in the election data. So it's this case where white males such as myself have had a massive advantage for literally thousands of years, but they are also falling behind pretty badly right now when it comes to young white males. I think both of these things can be true at the same time. And I think the election showed that a lot of young white males are frankly exhausted with being morally scolded or talked down to, or being told that they are the problem. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying it is. It shows up in the data. Is there space for both of these things to fit into our conversations on these topics?
Yeah, absolutely. We talk about in the book about rocking the boat and driving change and equity, and inclusion by rocking the boat and creating these, changes. And we talk about this idea of dropping pebbles, which is the way
Hmm.
you do it is the way you rock the boat is you do it through small, incremental, intentional steps, little easy things you can do every day, whether it's, the one-on-one meeting, or it's, looking out for people in your meetings that are getting interrupted or their ideas are being taken. But to your point, we rock the boat and we rock it hard, but we don't rock it so hard that anybody falls out. And the
Right.
people that are worried that they're going to get pushed out of the boat, so to speak, are white males. And they think that diversity work, I think the misunderstanding and the false narrative out there is that this work does not include white males. And it absolutely includes white males, because white males, being the dominant culture primarily, are in a position of power and privilege that they can actually be hugely impactful in driving the change that we need. So we need white males as advocates, as accomplices, as mentors, as sponsors to lift everyone up. Because if you go back to the kind of the metrics we talked about, that white males are dominant in the leadership of most organizations, nonprofit and profit, in government, legislature, state houses, federal, corporations, all the way across. They're the people that are in positions of power, so they benefit. So when the team, this, I always talk about this work about building high performance, highly effective teams, where everybody gets what they need in order to succeed, and when that happens, the organization succeeds. Who benefits? The people at the top are going to get promoted, they're going to get raises, they're going to get new opportunities, so they benefit just as well. And of course, women didn't get the right to vote until men gave them that vote, right? They
Hmm.
were in a position to actually make the change happen. And there's lots of examples of that through history. So they're absolutely part of the equation. They absolutely benefit. And when you have that richness of that diversity and everybody feels that they can, share their ideas and opinions and perspectives, their unique lived experiences, that's a huge benefit to those leaders to come up with better solutions for problems, to be more creative, to drive that innovation. And the other thing, Matt, that's super interesting, the studies show, is that when you have that diversity, everyone shows up differently. They come into the room more prepared. They know they're going to be, they just come in more prepared. They come in with greater levels of thought and consideration and planning for meetings. They just show up differently when they know that there's not this homogeneous group. When they have that diversity in the group, everyone comes in more prepared and ready to really have a good debate and discussion, because they know that's going to be part of the meeting. When you have that, you don't have group think, right? If everybody's the same,
Right.
everybody goes the same way. So when you have that diversity, you really benefit. And the studies prove that out.
Okay, that's a perfect segue to. So I've long thought this is the most important quality for a leader, and it's something it's a work in progress. I'm still working on it, but the ability to listen, and not just to listen to people who are higher in the org than you, but people at all levels of the organization. I think about it a ton, and I think we're all wired as humans, at least with it, until we work on it, to think that we need to say more, because if we're not talking, how's everybody going to know how smart I am and how important I am and how great my ideas are? And I would argue, this is totally anecdotal, and I would argue that 90% of bosses probably talk too much. And I probably fall into that 90% from time to time. Maybe you do as well. It's a hard thing to deprogram. What does your research or data show around the value that a company or a boss themselves can get out of listening more and talking less?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a little bit of what we've been talking about is that you really, in fact, Simon Sinek, if you're familiar with Simon Sinek's
Oh
work,
yeah,
Golden
Black
Circle,
Swan.
and yeah, I mean, he's amazing, and I think he has a book that's titled like Leaders Eat Last,
Hmm.
and this is this concept, and I saw this in all over Amazon, is that you'd come into a meeting with a senior most leader of the organization, senior VPs, even up to Bezos at the time. They would come into a meeting. And of course, the Amazon thing is you'd read these 6-pagers. So that was kind of bizarre. You'd have 15 to 30 people in a room and everybody's silently reading together for the first 20 minutes. But then they'd go around the room and they literally go page by page and talk through the document. And what would happen would be you'd have everybody speaking, but the leader. The leader would not talk about his opinion or her opinion, perspective, ideas. They would listen to everybody else and debate and discuss. And what would happen is that leader might have come in with an idea about the way they should go, or the direction of the problem and how it should be solved. That opinion may change just through that hour of that debate and discussion. So by the time they speak up, they may have already flipped on what they were going to think about, because they had been listening to everybody else. So, I mean, I talk about this in my classes. Yeah, I've been doing this work for 25 plus years, but when I have a class, I'm doing a class, I think, on Wednesday with 50 people. The aggregate knowledge of all those 50 people is much greater than mine, for sure, right? So, hearing your people, their ideas, their perspectives, they're, creating an environment where people feel psychologically safe to speak up, without worrying about being criticized, or interrupted or somebody taking credit for their ideas, that's going to, free them up to just be open, not worried about, saying something wrong. And that flow will really help the leader. So listening is huge, not only in the meetings when you're trying to solve problems, but as I mentioned, back to the one-on-one, connecting with your people, getting to know them, who they are, what they're about, so they really feel that you get them. And and that is super powerful because then they feel like they can be their authentic selves. And that's what you're really, you want. You want them to share what they're thinking. You don't want this environment where and I've seen this before where, if I've made the mistake of speaking up first, everybody falls in line with what I said, and you don't get
Yeah.
that contrarian opinion. And that's so dangerous because then you're missing out on you could actually be, it could be a flaw. And we've seen this. There's a book I have somewhere on my shelf here about failure. And it's super interesting that they study all these famous failures, that have occurred through, society or through history. And so often it's because the people didn't feel comfortable speaking up. Oftentimes the problem was known, but the person didn't have a voice to speak up, or they felt they weren't right, or they weren't, confident enough to speak up because their leader hadn't given them that. So listening is just absolutely huge as a leader.
Yeah, it turns into like it's self-preservation. If you have a leader who you're worried that's gonna come down on you or even fire you if you dissent in any way, you're just not gonna say what's on your mind. And it leads, I mean, I have a whole shelf of books back there too. I like to read about like financial crises and disasters and things like that. And
Yeah.
so much of it does come down to it comes down to groupthink. There's like this elephant in the room, but everybody's scared to bring it up, so they just stick to the status quo, and it eventually all, the chickens come home to roost, and the results can be pretty disastrous.
Yep. Absolutely. So yeah, it's huge to, for companies to be successful to, and we know that the diverse teams outperform homogeneous teams, and it's not, and that's the studies go back like to the 50s, but it's not easy. And we know that initially the homogeneous team will outperform initially because there's more debate and discussion. And what they find is there was one study done where they gave the two groups, a homogeneous team and a very highly diverse team, a problem. And the homogeneous team came to the solution faster. They were more confident of their solution. And yet the diverse team took longer, was less confident. They weren't sure they were right, but it was the diverse team that actually had the right answer. And they outperformed the homogeneous team. It took longer and they weren't as confident because everybody was, debating and arguing and they weren't sure that they were going to have the right solution. But it was that diverse team that actually was more successful.
Yeah, the older I get, the more I listen to people who are less sure of themselves, that are smart enough to know what they don't know. I think that's
Hmm.
a lesson as well. So I want to ask though, on the flip side of this, I think I completely agree. It's important to have a culture where everyone feels comfortable speaking up and going against the leader. But I do think in some instances, obviously in a large, particularly in a larger organization, not everything can be a democracy. Sometimes a decision just has to be made, right? And
Absolutely.
I've seen it in the form of, you would call it like organizational or corporate bloat, where before you know it, a minor change to the website requires 20 people to sign off on it, or you're in a meeting and 19 people agree on something, but the one person who doesn't like it has to drag it out. And so before, I know this isn't what your book is suggesting, but I'm curious, how do we let people be? I had actually a guest last week named Dana Lorberg, who was in the C-suite at MasterCard for years, and she talked about this, but I'm curious about your opinion. How do we remain efficient and make decisions when they have to be made, but also create this culture where people can speak up?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fine line. You want to have that debate and discussion, but at a certain point, the people in the positions of power and more experience, more knowledge from years of doing the work, have to make a call. But you want to be able to have information that allows you to, as Amazon used to say, to see around corners, or blind spots, because we all have them and we all have biases and we all have, you know, missing pieces of information. So you want to have all that information as much as you can gather. You want to do the analysis and go through that process. But at some point, when you feel like you've got all the data, you're right. Somebody's got to make the decision, and whether that's one or two or three people, but you do want to try and gather the facts and the information and hear from other folks. But it's not a decision by consensus. That I think that's dangerous. If I was, if I was writing a book again, writing it with 10 people would be, if we were all trying to do it, it would be a nightmare. I mean, even with two people, it was super challenging. We ended up having a writing development coach to help us, not only from the program management of keeping us on schedule for dates and deadlines, but when we disagreed, a book is very personal. You're, like you said, you're putting your whole life into it. And my co-author and I often disagreed, and having somebody to work with to help us get through that was super helpful. So you need to make, at some point, you got to make a call and go.
Exactly. So in the book, there was a section I kind of caught myself just like nodding my head. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've seen this, and it's so cringy when you witness it. But what you talk about, the idea of a single story. I guess first off, just tell our audience what that concept means.
Yeah. So this comes from a very famous um, book, or not book, video called "The Danger of a Single Story," right? And it's by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. She's a Nigerian author, famous, internationally known author. She wrote "Why We Should All Be Feminists," Americana, and she has a YouTube video called "The Danger of a Single Story." And the idea is that we all, are uh, affected by the media, the power of the messaging of what's out there, what you're hearing on the kind of the drumbeat of what you're hearing in the media and the press every day, and that has an effect to actually affect how you think about things, right? So you can develop these biases and stereotypes, and so that's kind of the basic idea of a single story.
And you talk about in the book and on kind of it can happen on an individual level. Like the example I think that you use, or that I've also seen in the workplace, is like something will happen in the media, or it's like a national story that's like air quotes here, that's like a black story. And people will go and ask the black person in the meeting, like, what do you think of this, black person? Like, and it creates this thing where, well, it creates this dynamic where it's like, because and it could be any type of minority group, but in this example I'm using a black person, where they're like the voice for their entire demographic, and at some point they're just like, dude, I just want to go to work and like do my job. I don't want any of this. So that's not really a question, but is there anything, am I getting that right? Do you want to elaborate at all?
Yeah, I mean, nobody wants to be tokenized, and
Yeah.
nobody wants to, this can happen when you have one person in the room that comes from a group outside the dominant culture. So they could be the only woman in the room, or the
Yeah.
only black person in the room, or the only Asian person. And especially if people aren't spending time with people like different from themselves, and this is their limited, narrow experience with a black person or an Asian person, or a gay person, whatever it is, group that comes from the minority culture, historically minority culture, that it can affect how the room's thinking about them. And nobody wants to be hired because they're black or because they're a woman, and to be, that's a very dangerous dynamic to have like only one person from a culture. I'm on a board right now, community board, nonprofit, and I worry for the one black person. We've really struggled to recruit people of color to, especially black people, to our particular board. We're in a predominantly uh, uh, it is fairly diverse area, but there's not a lot of black professionals in the community where I live in the east side of Seattle. Still to this day, even going back to when I was doing this work in the 90s at Microsoft, we struggled with it, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so it's a challenge, and I worry for that individual that they could be in a situation where they feel tokenized, and it's not healthy, and it's hard for them. I mean, they're very, very, very aware that they are the only black person in the room, and it's uncomfortable, and you have people oftentimes in the room who don't. We use this concept in the book called "Who's in Your Kitchen." And this is like, who are you? The kitchen being one of the most intimate places in your home, and it's where you tend to gather at parties and have friends and time. And I always challenge people, like, who's in your kitchen? Who are you spending time with outside of work? Because if you're only spending time with people that look like yourself, it's really limited and narrow, and your exposure to having like any level of cultural competency is really going to is going to suffer. So if you're only dealing with a Black person at work and you don't have anybody in your friend circle or your community or where you're spending time, you're going to really struggle to see them outside of that stereotype, and that's where it becomes dangerous. So it's really incumbent upon each of us to push ourselves, be more intentional about developing relationships with folks different from ourselves, so we can learn and grow and enjoy really the richness of spending time with people that come from a different place than we've come from.
Hey guys, we're taking a quick break, but before we get back into it, if you're enjoying this episode, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us to keep bringing you more valuable content. And if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, don't forget to leave a review. Please, it makes a huge difference. All right, let's get back to it.
So I recently read, you might be familiar with Jonathan Haidt's work, but he's a professor at NYU, pretty famous. But I recently read his book, Coddling of the American Mind. He's got another one that just came out that I want to
Mm.
read too, but I digress. Anyway, so in the book, Jonathan talks about the concept of microaggressions, which we're all, I think, somewhat, at least at a high level, familiar with what that means.
Yeah.
But his idea is that there are kind of two types. There are obviously very bad ones. Like the classic example would be like somebody that refers to a Black person as being eloquent. Like we all know what that means, and it's frankly racist, even if it's unintentional. But then there's the other type where maybe someone just words something poorly and they didn't mean anything by it. And the example he uses from the book, there was a story at Claremont McKenna College in Southern California a few years ago, where a student who was a Latin student wrote a letter to the dean and said, basically stated that she did not feel that the university was doing enough to make her feel welcome at a predominantly white school, right? Totally reasonable thing to bring up. And the professor wrote back that, what did she say? She was like, she said something to the effect of, we need to do more to make students who don't fit our Claremont mold feel better, or something like that. So really poorly worded, don't fit our mold. And I can't get inside the professor's head, or excuse me, the dean's head. I liked to think that she didn't mean anything bad by it, but the student took it, put it everywhere on social media. It blew up. There were protests, and it actually ended in this dean getting fired despite trying to apologize, explain what she meant, etc. So, long way of saying, like, and it's always a gray area, right? But how do we know, or when to just give somebody the benefit of the doubt and maybe they just worded something poorly, versus when somebody says something that is perhaps crossing a line or isn't, just a case of wording something poorly?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I remember you discussing this in one of your earlier podcasts, and in fact, it
Yeah.
was the first one I listened to, and and I remember thinking it through. I was driving, east to maybe to Bend, and I was listening to it in the car, and I was thinking to myself, this is really a case of what we call intent versus impact. The intent was positive. They were trying to say what we've been saying, that this person who was feeling not part of the Claremont McKenna culture was not part of the dominant culture. And what can we do to create a more inclusive culture where they really feel like that they belong, right? But that's not what she said. She said basically, we have this fit. And of course, when anybody says, this person is not, I'm not sure they're a fit for our company or a fit for our school, that's very dangerous because fit is very vague. And
Hmm.
oftentimes it's code language for they're not what we typically want to see in an organization, from what we expect or what the dominant culture looks like in behavior or in, whether they're, coming from, you'd hear this at Amazon, I'm not sure they're an Amazon fit. And oftentimes that meant that if they were coming and interviewing from Boeing, that they were from a bureaucratic, slow paced, again, stereotyping Boeing, and that they couldn't handle the fast pace, you know, of an Amazon, right? And so they'd say they're not a good fit. But that's stereotyping Boeing and it's stereotyping, that individual that everybody at Boeing is that way, which is obviously not the case. So the same thing here, the intent, let's get back to intent versus impact. So the intent of the dean was to say something, you know, call a duck a duck. This person is from outside the dominant culture and we need to do more at our school to help them feel that they belong. But what the person said was, a metaphor for almost stepping on a toe. Like if I step on your toe, I didn't intend to step on your toe, Matt. But at the same time, I'm going to recognize that I did and that I'm sorry and I hope I didn't cause you pain. And if I did cause you pain, I'm going to take accountability for it. And so what the professor or the dean failed to do was to acknowledge that her intent, while she intended to say something positively, it hurt and it had a very negative impact. And she's got to acknowledge that. And she's got to recognize that the pain that she caused that not only that individual, but people from who can relate, who from that, who from that community that was affected, whether it was a Black woman or whatever it might be, right? Um, so yeah, she said the wrong thing, and of course in today's social media, getting canceled is can happen super fast.
To extrapolate that out, though, don't we run the risk? And this is from the book as well. And Jonathan Haidt talks about this, that we shouldn't react based on how we feel or how something makes us feel, right? The idea was like, we're told always trust your feelings. And he kind of says, no, that's BS. And because the problem you run into is you could, and this is an extreme example, but you could walk up to me and say, hey, Matt, how's your day going? And if it makes me feel, if I don't want to talk to you today and it makes me feel a certain kind of way and I lash out at you, obviously that's a problem. That's an extreme example. But the point
Yeah,
is, just because someone says something, or they use the example of a public speaker who there's 1,000 people at the university and 5 of them don't like the way the speaker makes them feel, we're never going to have any public speakers anymore.
yeah.
So I don't know. Agree, disagree?
Well, I think there's when we were kids, at least when I was a kid, you hear this phrase: "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me," and that's just not true. Um, People do feel words, and in our work, these words or these microaggressions or micro insults, they or micro inequities, whatever terminology you want to use, they are what we call death by a thousand cuts. A little thing may not cause you to quit your job, getting interrupted in a meeting, somebody leaving you out when the team's going to lunch and they don't include you, um, little slights, those are called little, microaggressions, right? And they can hurt and they don't necessarily be so large that you'd quit your job or file a lawsuit or make a complaint or post it on social media. But over time, what happens is it causes people to disengage and not feel they don't belong there. They feel like they've been left out, they're excluded. And oftentimes their unconscious or unintentional gestures or messages can be a facial expression. I was in a meeting once with a director at Amazon, and I only got like a half hour with her, like once a quarter. So it was a precious amount of time to meet with her. I had like 20 directors plus that I was supporting at that time. And I come in the room and she's on her email, kind of talking to me over her shoulder. And then she finally turns and focuses on me. And she's literally, then she looks at her phone. And then at one point she looked at her watch. And I finally just said, if this is a bad time, let's reschedule. If you're having an
Yeah.
emergency you need to take care of. But these gestures, these kind of these messages I was getting was I didn't matter. Her time was more important than mine, and she didn't want to be spending time with me. And I was like, I'm getting the message, and let's just reschedule if this is a bad time. And yeah, she was a little taken aback because I called her on it, but I needed to call her out. It was really offensive, and I felt disrespected, and I needed to let her know. So, that was a nonverbal, but the examples you use are verbal. And I think, we use an example in the book of like calling in or calling out. And there are times when you do want to just, tell them that like what you're doing is inappropriate, it's offensive, it makes me feel bad, and let the person know it so they can apologize and own it and try and do better next time. Um, but it's really about this communication that needs to happen and not letting these things go. Calling in is when somebody truly has good intention and they've just said something that just, is offensive, makes you feel bad, and you can educate them. You can do it in a more diplomatic, thoughtful way. And we call that calling in, where you can, kind of not only educate them, but if it's in a room, in a meeting, you can educate the people in the room too. And that's part of that dropping a pebble. So you're sending a message that then ripples out, and other people then are inspired to model that behavior in the next meeting they're in, and that creates that ripple and the wave of actually driving change in the organization. So, it's a tough one, but you're talking about giving people the benefit of the doubt. I think sometimes, yes, you do want to, give people the benefit of the doubt to a degree, and you have to use your judgment to determine when you're going to give people the benefit of the doubt, and when you're going to, and it might be in a calling in moment. Say, I can tell you really didn't, have the awareness to know how this made me feel. So let me just, kind of pull you aside and talk to you for a minute about how it made me feel, and what I'd like to see happen differently. Give them some guidance, some education of what to do differently next time.
That's so good. Yeah, I think in the workplace, but life in general. I mean, your example of when you were in that meeting and call, I guess you would refer to that as calling in to your boss, or I don't know if it's your boss, but the
No, it's just
big
one of the directors I worked with.
one of the
And it was one,
directors.
yeah.
But
And yeah.
oh, sorry, go. You were going to say
I was
something
just going to
else.
say, I think in that environment, I kind of called her out.
Yeah,
I
okay,
kind of let
called
her know
out.
that, like, this is really, not working for me here.
Well, because I think people who are doing something like that, I mean, I think there's two buckets. Some people are just maybe kind of jerks, like there is those people exist. I think most people on some level, she probably knew what she was doing wasn't cool. Like there's no way, she probably logically knew in her head, like there's no way that this guy appreciates what I'm doing right now. But people just, so many people I think just need it voiced. Like think of, I don't know, this is a weird example, but I think of like, I go to a little coffee shop every morning to get my coffee and I read a book. And the other day, there was a guy in there who's just watching a YouTube or some TV show on his phone and has the speakers blared all the way up in this tiny little coffee shop. I'm like, dude, you can't do that. Like, do you have AirPods or something? And I guess my point is sometimes people do need to be called out, and they logically know what they're doing is ridiculous, but they need someone to say it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And in a company culture, it's absolutely critical because you're letting everybody else know that this is not consistent with our values. It's not who we are as an organization. And, you need to stop and you need to say you're sorry. And that not only sends a message to that person, but every person in the room that you're standing up. We talk about use your voice, speak up and use your voice, and have leaders. Again, getting back to the leader, giving their people license and agency to do that, to use their voice, and to not expect just the person who's leading the meeting to speak out when they see something that's inappropriate or offensive or just rude, like you said in this situation. I think in that situation, that individual is probably not going to do it again.
Right. Okay, so you actually mentioned a few of these scenarios when you were talking a couple minutes ago, and this hopefully this is a fun segment for you. I actually crowdsourced a few workplace scenarios that I think are pretty common that a ton of people will be able to relate to, and I want to get your kind of 2 cents on them, or maybe how you would handle the
Okay.
situation. Sound fun?
Yeah, all right, let's do it, man.
Okay, let's go. Let's start with this one. A lot of people can relate. Dating in the workplace. What is your philosophy on it, and what is a good corporate policy, or even a personal, like if I'm an individual that's interested in someone from a romantic perspective in the workplace, how should that be handled?
Wow. So I'm not sure this is a diversity question, but
I
we'll
know.
but I do have an
We're branching out a little bit,
all right.
Jonathan. I'm testing you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've got an HR experience as well. I
Yeah.
was certified in HR well a few years back. Um, so I think this is more and more common. Like when I was coming up through the ranks in the years, ago, um, it was just poo-pooed, you just didn't do that. And but I think now, like, I'd come home from work and I didn't want to see the people I worked with. I had my own friends and they were separate from work. Now I think things have changed, that your work friends are your friends at work are your friends oftentimes, and that's who you hang out with outside of work. That's much more common than it used to be when I came into the workforce. So I think it's natural that this can happen. I think that it's important for when relationships get to a certain point and the couple has to decide what's the appropriate thing to do. And one of them is to make sure that it's not a direct report relationship, that you wouldn't want someone in a relationship that's actually managing that person. So if you have an employee that falls in love with their manager, they need to communicate it to HR and to their management that this has happened. It's a good thing. We're happy. It's positive, but we don't think we should be reporting to each other. And usually, if the company's large enough, they can accommodate moving somebody into a different department where they're not reporting to each other, um, and keeping it separate. And of course, it is very common, and so people will often have a policy, between the couple of like, we're not going to talk about work outside of work. And so that's just something that has to be managed from a maturity standpoint, level of professionalism. But yeah, I mean, I think it's unavoidable in nowadays.
Okay. Here's another one. I work at company X. There's a guy or gal, couple cubicles over from me, that wants to get lunch with me all the time. I frankly work really hard. It's a long day, and my lunchtime is like my zone out me time. I don't want I want to just go throw I want to be by myself at lunch. And honestly, the person I don't it's not that I don't like them. It's just I don't really want to hang out with them on the 1 hour or 30 minutes that I have during the day. How do I tell them that I don't want to go get lunch with them every day without being mean or rude about it?
I think you just did it. I mean, I think you just be honest and candid and say, this is how I like to, my work's super intense, and that hour that I have is a time that I take for to just kind of recharge, and I really don't want to spend it with anybody, and it's not personal to you. I may go to lunch once in a while. That's cool. But for the most part, I like to use that hour to recharge and have some personal time to gather my thoughts. And sometimes I have errands to run. Sometimes I've got, I want to go for a workout or whatever it might be. But it's really my time, and I really, I kind of have a policy. You could say that I have a policy is I just don't go to lunch with coworkers. Uh, you can make it as hard and fast a rule as you want, or you could just say, "This is my personal time." But I like the policy idea because then it's just like I have a policy that I don't go to lunch with coworkers, so I can have. But I like the recharging idea because that's more informal and it's more, respecting your space.
Yeah, it's very impersonal. It's not about you, it's about me. I just need this time to
Yeah, it isn't
myself.
you, it's me.
Yeah,
Right?
we all
Yeah.
love that one, right? Um, okay, here's another one. So a colleague or a superior keeps taking credit for things that I'm doing at work. And this could
Uh,
be verbally in meetings, but also the one that I see or hear about, it'll be on like an email thread. So for example, um, I went and handled this. I know someone in marketing. I went and handled this photo shoot offsite for a marketing campaign. And my colleague hopped into an email thread and referred to it as the camp or the photo shoot that I took care of, basically
Right.
just hopping in and saying it was them. What do you do?
Wow. So this is one that it's actually I use in training, and it's in the book, I believe. And this is this idea of when somebody does that, and other people, there must have been other, not must have been, but oftentimes there's somebody else who's on the thread or in a meeting where somebody takes credit for
Yeah,
work
it's
that they.
usually, sorry to add a little bit. It's usually because someone that's deemed to be really important is in the thread and the person hopping in to take the credit wants that person to see it.
Yeah. So this is where this idea of allyship comes in, where you're thinking, man, that is BS. This person is just basically taking credit for my work. And if there's anybody else in the room that, and this is again part of leadership, is anybody, whether it's the leader that's on that thread or somebody else who knows that you actually did the work, Matt, to say, hey, now hold on a second here, I know for a fact that Matt did this work, and and here's what he did, or what have you. Um, and I appreciate that you supported him, or you can somehow put it so you're not completely throwing that person under the bus, but you want somebody in the thread to, hey, have the chutzpah to speak up and say, hold on a second, Matt owned this work. He drove this and really made it a success. You may be thinking, and then maybe you let him off the hook a little bit. And you say, maybe it was something, this other project you were thinking of, give them an out,
Oh, yeah.
um, something like that. So they have an out. But and then for you, you don't want to be the one, oh, hold on a second, I did that. You don't want to be that guy either, because that makes you look bad, even though you did do the work, and you'd be justified in saying it. Maybe offline you can reach out to them and say, like, or maybe again you say, maybe there's some confusion here. I'm pretty sure that I owned that project and I did that work, and not that I need all the credit in the world, but that wasn't very cool, saying that I took care of this when you weren't even involved with it, or you had a minimal participation. I'd really appreciate it, and give you, like, correcting that. You could also go to your manager. That's not always the best option, but it's an option, is to say, I need you to back me up in these situations. Like, when you see this happening, this is maybe it's a pattern with this individual, that this person needs to be counseled to not take credit for work that they didn't do. So having an ally, whether it's your manager or somebody else on the team, that you could even go to and say, I'm going to send this email out, and, this one individual is on it. We know that they have a pattern of taking credit for other people's work. If you see that happening, would you be willing to jump in and just kind of course correct them, to kind of shut that down? So, you could even conspire, kind of have an accomplice to help you make sure that no one's taking credit for your work, which is really not cool at all. I don't know. That's kind
Got
of
it.
me just kind of, riffing here.
No, I mean, I think you gave three different ways to handle it. They're super helpful. Um, so Jonathan, before we let you go, you've been super generous with your time, which I appreciate. Three final questions that I ask everybody who comes on. Let's step back from work. What do you like to do for fun? What do you do to unwind?
I am a avid runner. I've been a runner for a long, long time, 30 plus years. And I do spend a lot of time running, probably 15 to 20 miles a week. And like today was a weights day, so I go into the club and I do weights for a couple hours. Um, so just staying fit, I do for fun. I like to hike. I've gotten into pickleball a little bit. And I have a 5-year-old English cream golden retriever, and it's a COVID pup, and we spend a lot of time together. So walking, going to the park, playing. We did that today, throwing frisbee to him, just having fun with my dog, and listening to great podcasts like yours.
Well, thank you for saying that. And actually leads right into the next question. What is the best thing that you've read, watched, or listened to recently?
Wow. So really interesting. So I don't typically like talk about religion or things of that nature, but I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that I'm Jewish, and I really struggled for many, many years to uh, connect to my religion from a spiritual side. I just never felt like I was getting it. There was something missing. And I've been on a search for many years, reading lots of different books, to trying to find that connection. And it comes and goes over the years. I'll go through spurts while I'm doing more into it, trying to find that connection. But I've just never felt anything going to synagogue or, except for the friends and family and the good food and culture and history. But recently, I discovered this ancient study of philosophy called Mussar, Mussar. Never heard about it. Didn't know what it was about. Mussar basically is about self growth and personal growth, but also growth in others that you can enable. And it's about these values such as gratitude, humility, generosity, and they're not even religious. They're just really good life learnings that help you guide you and that we're all on this continuum. Take humility. If you think about it, like how much space do I take up in a room when I'm with people, and finding that nice middle ground. You don't want to be like never speaking up and never getting engaged, and you don't want to be the one that dominates the conversation. So how do you find that middle space of just having the right amount of voice and the right amount of listening, like we were talking about, right? In any room, in any meeting. So that's humility, knowing how much space you should take up in any given setting. And there's like 18, 20 different character traits. Anyway, I've been reading a book about that, and it's super interesting. I would encourage people to look into that. And I'm spacing out on the name of the book, but maybe we can put it in the notes.
No worries. And lastly, where can people follow you? And is there anything you'd like to plug? Any organizations you'd like to shout out, or if you want to tell people where they can get your book? They may not.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Um,
you'll do autograph versions for all of our listeners or not. But if you
Yeah,
want
if they
to,
send me a book to autograph or sign it, I will happily do that, and I'll send it back free of charge. Absolutely. Yeah. So the book's Daily Practices of Inclusive Leaders. It's available from your favorite bookseller. Go into any local bookstore and ask for it. Hopefully, it's on the shelf. Otherwise, you can find it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. Any of those, but I prefer independent local booksellers are great to support. And then my website is globaldiversitypartners.net. And the book has its own website, inclusivepebbles.com. So those are great ways. And then feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn as well to connect. Happy to do that. But yeah, inclusivepebbles.com is where you can learn more about the book and then pick it up at your local bookseller.
all
Thanks.
right, Jonathan. Well, thank you for coming on. You're incredibly interesting guy to talk to. You really talking to you on here, also reading your book, you challenged me to examine myself, like think harder about things, challenge my own beliefs about things, and it's incredibly valuable conversation. And I appreciate you making time for us.
You bet. It was a really fun conversation, Matt. Really enjoyed it. And I really appreciate you having me on. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jonathan.
That is a wrap for today's episode. Thanks for tuning in to the Saucetown Investor. If you got value from this, drop us a comment and let us know your thoughts. Did you have a big takeaway? Is there a topic you want to see us cover next time? Is there a guest you want to see interviewed? DMs are open. Business is at Saucetown Properties, and my personal, you can DM me personally, is at The Real Matt Cox 4. We'd also like to ask you kindly to please like and subscribe. You can also follow along with the Saucetown Investor blog. That's mattcox444.substack.com. Thanks again, guys, and until next time, keep investing and stay saucy, Saucetown.